Um, I am Nancy Bush. I'm the director of our Disaster Management Department, and I'll be giving the presentation today, of course, on our department and our programs. I do want to introduce Sarah Eckman, who is here with me. She's a large part of pulling this budget together and understanding what is going on, so I would just like to thank her for that publicly as well. So before I move on to the other slides, I just wanted to take a moment to take a look at this slide and take a look at this particular photo. This photo was actually an aerial view of the 2015 storms that we had in December. This particular area is, of course, partially the city of Milwaukee and also unincorporated Clackamas. This was a pretty large disaster here in our county. It also included some landslides, which were also in Oregon City, as well as some of the other landslides that we had on some of our roadways. And this ended up being a federal disaster for the state of Oregon, but it was not a federal disaster for Clackamas County. So we'll talk a little bit more about that impact and what that means as we move forward. But I just wanted to show this photo and show some of the challenges that we have. We had some challenges with, doing some, making sure we had sheltering in place, getting people out. We had to work very closely with our fire department. They did rescues where they actually brought boats in. Our EOC, of course, was activated during this particular time, which is our Emergency Operations Center. But this is just a little bit of what we do and how we do it and how we work together with our different partners. Next up is our department mission. So I'm not going to read this slide to you, but I want to emphasize that our mission is important to all of our staff, both on our disaster management side as well as our medical examiner side. In our disaster management line of business, we've included goals providing planning and education to 21 identified zones here in the county. Those zones are divided by natural barriers, which includes waterways and also roads. We've worked with Clackamas County Transportation and Maintenance Division, Social Services, and Incorporated Cities, as well as others, to identify what we can do in those particular zones, see what is most likely to happen in those zones, and determine where we can safely place some things for those populations so that they can be more secure during events. Our medical examiner line of business, we have goals related to the service we provide to the family as well as to law enforcement and to the district attorney's office and to state partnerships. The Clackamas County ME's office is focused on timely and accurate death investigations and treating the family and loved ones with great respect that they deserve and need during one of the worst times of their lives. So we are a small department. We have 2 lines of business after we went through MFR. We were going to try to do 3 lines of business, but it just didn't make sense. We wanted the Emergency Operations Center to maybe be a separate business because it's a very expensive piece of what we do. But it really just didn't make sense, so we ended up leaving that in disaster management. Our total disaster management request is $3.3 million, and of that $3.3 million, almost $1.3 million is from general fund. Our medical examiner's office is a little over $922,000, and the general fund is a little bit over $888,000. For the medical examiners in particular, it's important to note that what makes up the difference in that $922,000 is actually carry forward. So actually, the medical examiners are 100% general funded in that respect. Here's our departmental budget request and the 3-year trend. You'll note that we tend to be pretty stable. We are losing some funding when it comes to federal funding that's coming down. So you'll see some of those grant dollars starting to come down. And our general fund support has been fairly stable. This year we did receive more funding because as we continue to move forward, we're running out of that carry forward in order to do our maintenance operations. So we were able to get more general fund this year to help that out and to make sure that we're more stable to do those operations. The difference, whenever you look at that first year up there, there's a difference in between what we've expended and the money coming in, and that primarily is from that carry forward that has been helping us go from year to year and be able to keep those operations at a maintenance level. And again, it is important to note here that a lot of our grants are either drying up or shrinking. Our proposed budget. This slide also shows where our department resources lie and where our expenditures come from. We have had some significant changes over the last year, so I'll kind of go through those a little bit. Revenues from federal grants is, let me see, that particular piece is up. That did climb this year because we do have some revenues that we are anticipating getting for mitigation projects, which are in the Lake Road area, which is the picture that I showed on the initial slide. We have 2 homes there in particular that we're looking at either doing buyouts for or elevations. And we will receive dollars to do that from the federal government for mitigation dollars. And both of those projects are anywhere from 90% to 100% covered. If it's 90%, then the homeowner covers that. We don't, but it does become our property if we do the buyout there. So that's why those particular dollars are up this year. Capital outlay increased, if you'll notice, like over 2,000%. That's because we usually have no capital outlay. And this year we did get some urban areas security initiative dollars, we call UASI, to buy some equipment for medical examiners. Those dollars will flow through the county. We will purchase the equipment, but the equipment is really being purchased for the region and for the state medical examiner's office. So we don't hold it in the county medical examiner's office. It's a regional and state asset. The Clackamas County has just agreed to make that purchase, but obviously it has to come, it shows on our budget. So that is why capital outlay has gotten much larger. Special payments has increased due to the UASI dollars again, and special payments is a pass-through only. So we here at Clackamas County never see the dollars, but UASI is from the federal government to the state government to the city of Portland, and then we sign agreement at the county with the city of Portland as part of the UASI area. And then we have jurisdictions such as Clackamas Fire, cities, public works departments that receive that funding that actually has to pass through our budget, but it does inflate our budget. We never actually see those dollars. But we are anticipating getting some more dollars in that particular area for this next year, which is why that is also up a little bit. Contingency funding is significantly less due to us using that funding to keep our operations moving. The medical examiner's allocated cost increased pretty significantly. I think it was 38%. And the reason for that particular increase is because of records management. And we've been using records management to take some of our records from several years ago and make them digital. And the reason we've had to do that is because we have human remains of cases that have never been solved, and we have to go and find those records pretty frequently as they are being investigated. And it became a real process and was actually costing more money for us to try to go because it was all on microfiche. So that is that process that we're working on with them to get that up to date, and so that we'll have everything digitally that we can go look at for those human remains. We have not had any changes in our full-time, our FTEs. The last time we did have a change was in 2010 when we actually lost an FTE, which was due, of course, to the downturn of the economy at that time. So we continue to have 6 in disaster management and 5 in the medical examiner's office. This is our proposed budget by for the line of business. And again, you'll see here that the disaster management program, of course, is 78%. That is due, of course, we do have a little bit larger program. We do have more money coming in to support the Emergency Operations Center, which is quite expensive to maintain, which the Emergency Operations Center is also something we have to maintain by, according to Oregon state statutes, as well as have the program. The medical examiners program, of course, is a little bit less of that. They do not have any of the grants coming in that we do or we have to show in our budget. They are actually housed in a state building with the state medical examiner's office as well. So there's a little bit less overhead there that kind of cuts a little bit off of the budget, and that helps us out a little bit. Key performance measures. So disaster management, I will say we do struggle with our performance measures and trying to make sure we have some really good solid performance measures, and we have talked to other disaster management departments or emergency management departments that have went through this process, and they all struggle with the same thing. So we are actually going through the process a little bit more right now. Again, we actually are doing it again, trying to find some things that will maybe help this process. But right now what we have is under disaster management, we have the federally required disaster management plans that we have to keep up to date that are required if we want to receive any kind of federal funding. You'll note there that we should be at 100% because we really want to make sure those are done so we can have those plans, and whenever an event happens, we get our full funding. There's 2 plans that we have not been able to complete on time. One of them is the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, which we did receive an extension for. Part of that is because it is federally funded partially. It partially comes from our budget of the general fund, and the federal money did not come through until quite late this year. So they did say that we could have an extension on that. We do anticipate, it was supposed to be done in April. However, we do anticipate it being done in August, which is not that, the time period is not that stretched out, but we, right now, technically are out of compliance but we do have an extension, so if something were to happen, we're covered. The other one is the evacuation plan for Mount Hood. We have started that process, but because we do not have a planner on staff and we had some limitations on budgeting, we were not able to get a contractor. However, that has been alleviated, and we're going to be able to get a contractor now to help us finish that up. An evacuation plan for Mount Hood is not as simple as you might think it is. And there's several partners that we work with, including tourism, the Federal Forest Service, the City of Sandy. So getting all those partners together is going to be, I think it'll start rolling much quickly now that we're able to have someone help us do that. So those are the 2 plans that we did not get done this year that we were supposed to. That particular plan was supposed to be done by the end of June. We anticipate it being done by the end of December. And again, we did get an extension for that as well. Going into the medical examiners. The medical examiners in particular really look at quality assurance. How are they doing death investigations, and how is that quality assurance transferring into how they work with law enforcement as well with families, the district attorney's office, loved ones, et cetera. The number of scene investigations with interviews and investigations where quality assurance reviews are conducted, we actually have the manager who goes out with our staff for at least 4% of their calls annually to make sure that we are using, or that they are using the national standards, which we use as our template. So that's at 4%, and we did go out on 4% of those calls this year, or anticipate that we will. I think it's already done, actually. The conducted quality assurance reviews we want to make sure that we're at least 95% compliant. We would like to be 100% compliant. However, we know that no one is perfect. But we are hitting that 95% mark at a minimum, and I think that actually may go up, and we may hit like 98%. And I went ahead and put, this is a widget thing, but we do talk about the medical examiner number of cases and how many cases that we actually do death investigations on annually. And we're looking at their over 800 cases now a year. And we'll talk a little bit more about the population growth and what that's going to mean for that. Our key performance measures. The first measure there is implemented a quality assurance review for the death investigators. And again, we just talked about that briefly. We continue to do that. We have targeted training offered for the Emergency Operations Center. We cannot do that alone, obviously, because we run 24/7. I have 6 staff, right? That doesn't work, doesn't pencil out very well. We have about 120 county staff that have been identified and said that they will work in the Emergency Operations Center, but we are required to make sure that they receive that training every year. We also have next week a huge exercise, and 250 county employees are playing in that exercise next week, which means all of them also had to get some pretty intense training as well. So that is something that we've actually expanded after the MFR, because we realized that if the Emergency Operations Center is not working, then we have a lot of problems down the road with all of our partners as well as other county departments. We also have an employee preparedness program, which is something that came from MFR, because we also realized that if our county employees are not prepared to come into work when we have disasters, that also causes huge problems. So we have a preparedness program that we have put together for county employees. We, excuse me, we have about 50 that go through on a 12-week period, where we help them build a plan, build a kit, and bring them back together to share their information. So that has been something that has been quite successful as well, and we offer 2 of those classes a year, primarily because we have issues with making sure we have enough staff. We also have a card. It's a green card, and actually all the commissioners should have one of these too. This is the Employee Disaster Reporting Card, which is another measure, and we wanted people to have a place to, if there was a very large event, especially something like Cascadia, it's like, how do we know if our staff are okay? How do we know if they can come in or they can't come in? Or maybe they can report to one of the cities or another emergency operations center throughout the county. This program took a lot to get off the ground, but it was something that we found to be very important at our MFR sessions. And we did have an exercise for this particular card, and we had 600 employees that called in, which actually is quite successful when you think about how many employees we have. So that is something that we got up and running as well. Some of the things that we aren't doing anymore, just real quickly, we are not doing some of the basic training that we used to do. If we do have new staff that need that basics training that are coming into the EOC, that is available either online or sometimes other counties offer that training and we take advantage of that. But we wanted to make sure that we were doing our more advanced training because it seems like we were spending so much of our time on that level and we weren't getting people to this level, upper level. And then the other thing on the last one is we are no longer doing a preparedness calendar. That particular calendar was done here in ClackCo County, even though it was for the region, but we did a lion's share of that work. And when we went through that process, we said, we cannot do this anymore. We don't have the staff. We don't know if it really is being impactful in any way. So we no longer do the calendar. We told our partners that. No one picked it up either, so that kind of says a few things too. Yeah. Yeah. So on to emerging issues. We have a lot of emerging issues. I try to keep it pretty short. First of all, the medical examiner's office, we talked a little bit about how many death investigations that they're doing annually. We are seeing an increase due to the population increasing here in Clackamas County. For FY 2017-2018, we are anticipating a 9% increase in reported deaths in the county. And that will continue to climb as we also, have the county population growing. So we are expecting probably within the next 5 years, we're going to have another probably deputy medical examiner to help with that. That is a 24/7 operation. And any of you, and it's also something that we want to make sure is high quality. If you have known anyone or you've had been a part of someone where our medical examiners had to be a part of, you understand how important that is. So as we start looking forward and we start seeing that stretch, we'll be asking for another staff in that particular area. With disaster management, we also are seeing a lot more disasters, even though they may be low level, because and a lot of it has to do with climate change and the things that we're seeing in our climate. We're having more severe natural disasters. Wildland fire last year, as you know, really took off here, not only in our state, but also in California, and that is becoming more the norm than the exception. We had our own fire here in ClackCo County for the first time. We had a conflagration act. We'd never had one in 2014, which was with 36 Pitt. In the media, they called it the Estacada Fire. Last year, the Eagle Creek Fire almost came into Clackamas County. We were ready for that because we were looking up toward that border and where it would look like it could come right into Clackamas County. And we also assisted with that particular event. But we're seeing that more and more. And this spring has been very dry. We could see it again this year. We're having a lot more flooding in winter storms. Disaster management, we do actually have the EOC is usually, I would say on average, we have 3 times a year or so we are actually activated. A lot of you don't know that because they don't get to that level. But we're seeing a lot more activations that we've seen in the past, and a lot of that is due to the weather patterns changing. Our federal funding will continue to decline for operational disaster management, mitigation, and recovery. Over the next 5 years, I anticipate 1 or 2 of our grants will probably just stop. I think that we're going to see some funding that is just going to go away over in that particular area. The other thing I'd like to mention is, doing some planning, which isn't up there, like planning for Mount Hood. We've been watching Hawaii very, very, very closely, and we know that our particular volcano is just sleeping. It is not dormant. And what are we going to do, and what does that look like? And we're starting some efforts around that and some planning around that. But that communication and where do you put people, because it could be years. Right? I mean, Mount Hood could start and we don't know if it's really going to go or not, and we could have to move people out just because of the nature of that particular volcano. So we're looking at that. And of course, we have Cascadia, and how do we really plan for that? And if it's a 9.0, and are we realistic? Because we're going to have aftershocks. We're going to be able, we'll be in this building. We could have to leave. We get back in here. There's an aftershock. You have to leave. Someone has to inspect the building. How do we really realistic at how that's going to work? Not to mention that it's going to impact the West Coast from Northern California all the way up. So those are some things that we're really looking at, and how, especially over the next few years, how do we make sure we do really good, solid planning, exercising, and being very realistic. And I believe I'm close to my 15 minutes. So, excuse me.
We do have 3 members who would like to pose questions. We're going to start with Commissioner Humberston, and then Mr. Feely, and then Commissioner Schrader.
Short and sweet. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Do you provide any funding for the amateur radio operators that assist us in disasters?
Yes, we do. We actually have a very good relationship with our amateur radio group, and we call it the Ham Shack. But we actually do have a ham shack. It's a trailer that sits between us and the jail. So we provide that space as well as all the equipment in that space. And then we also provide go kits for that particular group.
And then you'd indicated that you expect in the next few years to need more staff, but you also indicated that you expect the grant revenue to decline, if not cease. So how do you anticipate funding? General fund?
At this point, that's a good question, and, we've been having some conversations about that and what that may look like. We're really just struggling to make sure that we don't go below our current level right now. I think that when we talk about more staff, it's really more toward the medical examiners in that particular piece. If I don't lose staff in emergency management, we can continue that level of service that we have now, which I know is very important to our residents through the survey, of course. But that's a good question. We're still in, talking about that and what that may look like. And, if I had one more staff in disaster management, I would just be thrilled. And I would hire a planner because that really sucks a lot of time and needs a lot of attention.
I guess I don't recall you actually making a pitch for a single or an additional staff member in your present. in here.
And not in this present one. For either program, we have not made that pitch yet. And that's something, again, we're talking to our county administration.
The rules didn't really allow unsolicited policy-level proposals, right, Don?
Not sure I'd call that a policy-level proposal.
Well,
but
but
I'll
whatever,
take it.
yeah, yeah.
I'll take it at that.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, we're struggling. We wanted to make sure, which is, we worked with Mr. Krupp on making sure we could do our current operations this year. You might see us a little bit later about another staff, but we just need to make sure we could keep our current level up because
So
it would,
can I assume by next budget cycle, there might be a proposal?
there could be a proposal. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Feely?
Thank you. I appreciate your comments on the disaster management performance measures. I think these probably are used by hundreds of jurisdictions across the country for the last maybe 40 years.
Yeah.
In fact, I worked at the Departmental Fire Bureau. We had the city's emergency management program within
Yeah. you
the
do.
Fire Bureau, and
Yes.
these were our performance measurements
Yeah.
back in the 80s.
Right. And it's really difficult. And everybody we talk to, they're like, yeah, and it's like, and when we have events, we do have some things that we collect during events, like how quickly do we get information out? How quickly do those things are measured then. But until we have those events, those measures don't
Yeah,
bubble up.
It's hard to measure. It's difficult, but it'd be great
It
if
is.
there was a way to do it,
And
even
I-
if it's a collective opinion. So I do want to ask you, what is your opinion about the preparedness of Clackamas County and factor in employees training in ICS and their specific section responsibilities at the EOC, which
So I think, I might be a little.
ICS finance chief, so that's why I'm
Oh,
asking.
nice to know. We might have to call you someday. And I know I'm a little biased because, we have fabulous staff. We have very little turnover in our staff as well, which actually makes us more consistent in our training as well as in how we handle our emergency operations center. I would say that as far as how we run our staff and how we run our sections is very, it's very professional, and we take the look that we can change this and it flows. And so we can change it for other events. Some of our sister agencies are like, no, we're strictly an ICS structure, and we work within that. We have a lot more latitude in how we work with that. We have a very, very good relationship, too, with our county administrator and with the commissioners as well, and with understanding of what we will need during a disaster and what is going to bubble up and how we are going to have to move forward during the very large disasters, and especially when it comes to funding. We're very solid. We have 120 people that said, yes, we'll come and work in the EOC. I think we're weak there. I think that sounds a lot like a lot of people to some people.
I was going to, that was.
But if you're working in an EOC and you're working at 24/7, that is not a lot
Well,
of people.
and you're leaving your family during the
And you're
time of
leaving
a
your
disaster,
family.
and that's a critical thing to factor before the event happens.
Right.
Because a lot of people aren't going to leave their family.
Yeah, some people can't show up or
can't.
won't show up.
Yeah.
Some people are going to be, we don't like to put people under rubble, but, they might be in Bora Bora, right?
I don't know.
But you don't know. I think that's one of the places we're weak in, and we're trying to figure out how we can do some.
Okay, well, I would encourage you
working
to
with that.
try and even if it's a guideline for employees, like before you say you can do this, factor these in, like, do you have childcare or whatever?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, thank you.
And then just on the COOP, are you involved, we just heard from Technology Services
Yes.
about the continuity operations plan. Are you involved in that?
Yes, we are
Okay,
involved
good.
in the COOP planning, not only with technology services, but for the whole county.
county,
And we
okay.
actually, that is one of the things that we have funded for the whole county, to make sure that we have a COOP plan in every department and division, and trying to make sure that those are done and completed in a timely manner. And we have a system for people, the director signing off on those.
Right, okay.
I'm not saying they're all done, but we do have, we're trying to or hit at least 85% that have been signed off on.
Okay.
But yes, we're very much part of that process.
Thanks.
Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, a couple of things. So, I think the biggest concern I have is the interoperability of communication systems. How's that coming along?
So it is, yeah, and that's partially a question for us, and it's also largely partially a question for CCOM. Because we look to them and for helping with our communications process. I will say that we are part of making sure that we have that intercommunications going, and we have radios as well, and actually, as part of the bond, we will get new radios too, to make sure that we can communicate and that we have caches that we can give out as needed, because we've actually loaned them to fire departments before, because they didn't have interoperability where they needed it in certain particular, So that is, it's better, and I think it's going to get even better as we move forward with the bond.
But we still have issues with it though, right? I mean, we still,
Yeah, not like we did at 9/11.
okay.
9/11 was like, and
Nightmare.
things have gotten much better since then. And because it's been very helpful to be in a building with CCOM, because we're able to just open the door and go over there and have communications. And they, for the most part, again, it's also a question for them, but for the most part, for our purposes, we have been able to communicate both with law, fire, as well as other jurisdictions in the county without
Okay.
any issue. And the ham radio piece comes in if we lose all communications. We have a really, really strong ham radio piece that also can help with,
Okay.
we're actually doing an exercise with the roads department next week to make sure that they can help with that particular piece too. So through ham radio, we've even gotten a stronger backup system
Okay.
that you don't see in some other jurisdictions.
How do we get ham radio training?
I will be happy to connect you with Mr. Dave Kidd, and,
I could take care of that.
oh, and actually Ken can actually take care of that as well.
Are you ham radio operator?
Yeah, and if you want to be a ham radio operator, we would very much like that. And I'll just get you connected with Dave, and he can help you out with that.
Other question is that one of the key things you deal with every year is the flooding on Mount Hood, the Sandy River.
Yes.
Any incidents this year, other than fire? Obviously fire, but what's been going on? Because you've been doing a lot of programming, a lot of mitigation, a lot of.
Yes, we've been doing a
education
lot
up
of
there.
work up there, and the primary concern on the Sandy River, for those of you, it's a migrating river, which means that it doesn't go out of its bank and then back in its banks. It means that there could be a flood and it totally will switch channels. And so there's an erosion issue. So some of the things that we're looking at, we actually have a project, with the Corps of Engineers to do some more community outreach and to start really talking seriously about how do we look at all of these homes that are within this particular zone. And, how do we move forward with the community? And then the other piece, which actually has a lot to do with the state and how the state says that we can deal with migration zones. And do, something where it's like, well, you can't build any new buildings within this zone, et cetera. But until the state changes a few laws, which we're trying to move forward with Oregon Solutions, but until they change a few laws, the county is really, really, really out on a really thin limb of trying to change some of that. So we're trying to get the state to make some changes so the county can adopt certain maps, scientific maps that have been done to say you can no longer build in this
Don't
zone.
build there, yeah.
So it's all a process. It's a long process. But there were no incidents up there this year, at least so far.
Okay.
We have two more questions or comments, whichever, but anyhow, Commissioner Savas and then Mr. Magdalene.
Yeah, was just curious if either in Oregon or Washington, there's any other comparable departments that incorporate search and rescue in their operations and/or funding, knowing it's similar, but I know it's unique and different, but just wondering if there are any examples you can think of right off the top of your
Yeah,
head.
that's a really interesting question, because search and rescue in smaller counties is actually, a lot of them are in their emergency management department, or they're very closely linked. Because emergency management, a lot of times will sit in, the smaller the county, it will sit in, like the sheriff's office. So that funding in those particular areas, like our emergency management program funding, has went to search and rescue because of how they work together. The larger counties, you don't see that happening. So, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, but it depends on the size of your county, and it depends on what they're using the money for, because EMPG is very, very specific. And recently, they've actually moved away from any EMPG money going to any search and rescue, because it really isn't operational for emergency management.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yep, close enough, thanks. I'll follow up with you later.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Magdalene?
Thank you. I'm looking at the state shared county chart. Emergency management, I'm assuming you fall under that.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
like to call ourselves disaster management. Yes, it's an emergency management program.
If you took what the county is spending, compared it to what the state is spending on the shared services, how does it break out?
So I'm not sure,
You don't have that, you
I
don't
don't
have that
have that.
handout?
yeah.
Via email.
I don't,
Let's see, do I have that? If I do, I don't recall it.
I see, it's an AOC handout.
Okay. I get. Just the other question
Okay.
No, we don't
is
have
to,
it.
to take a look and see if you can refine your estimate of grant funding going several years out. I don't think anybody wants to reduce the effort and the planning that's going on.
Yes.
So if that's the consensus of the commissioners, when do they start to need the general fund, additional general fund support?
So we
To
received,
next year's budget, isn't it, Don? Didn't you
I was gonna
increase the
say-
general fund?
go ahead.
So there's always been some general fund support
Right,
to.
but didn't you increase it for next
Disaster
year?
management, and in this proposed budget, I have added about $250,000 of general fund dollars to keep emergency or disaster management whole, to be able to maintain those 11
Because of
FTEs in the
loss of
budget.
grants. Yep, yep.
So I guess the question is that a long-term
Yeah.
commitment?
Yeah, I think Ken's a very good way of putting it. Is that a long-term commitment? Is this something that, if another $500,000 drops off from federal or some other grant?
So it is planned and programmed in for not just this coming fiscal year, but also next fiscal year. I think probably the best way of answering that question is we do have a basic need to maintain our existing and perhaps enhanced capacity for disaster management efforts here in Clackamas County. I'm not expecting the situations relative to flooding conditions and wildfire conditions to actually be lessened in the future just because of the kind of overall issues around climate change. I think we're going to be finding a greater and greater demand on the coordinating, planning, and prevention role that disaster management plays with that. I mean, the whole system really is built and intended to build capacity
Stand in between
from the
us
bottom
and
up,
lunch.
so that we have capacity to be able to respond here locally, and then if and when we reach a point where we're beyond that capacity because the nature of an event demands it, then we rely on the help from the state, and then beyond that, help from the federal government. But
Correct,
the goal
yeah.
is to have capacity here locally to be able to respond.
Right. And the capacities locally there's more of a demand on that too, because you're seeing the formulas at the federal level that are changing. And there are events that will have normally been a federal declared disaster that will not be federally declared in the future. And that's going to be a local lift.
Evolving to all
It
level.
is,
Can you
exactly.
give an example, please?
An example, actually, whenever I showed that first slide of that particular event, I was surprised we did not get a federal declaration in Clackamas County. Like I said, the state did it because they had other counties that were impacted, but we did not meet the threshold, and it was because some of the things that normally were allowed were not allowed in that particular, when you looked at that event. So that's an example.
Commissioner Humberston has a comment to this part of the discussion, and then we'll close this part of the hearing.
Okay, thank
This will
you.
be short and sweet, but your answer to Mr. Magdalen's question sounded to me like, yes, it's a long-term commitment.
Yes, it's a
Thank you.
long-term commitment.
Could have been that easy. We will now adjourn.